Good morning. This is a really great book, and this is in honor of men that we're going to be discussing this book for a few videos. The New Male Sexuality, The Truth About Men, Sex, and Pleasure by Bernie Zilbergeld, PhD. He wrote this book in the 90s, but I find it just as pertinent today. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book and I'll make a few comments. And if you like the book, order it yourself. I just started reading this recently. So men in our culture walk a thin line. Like their fathers and grandfathers, they must be sure their behavior conforms to what is considered manly. It takes very little, maybe as little as one failure or one sign of weakness, to lose one's place in the charmed circle of men and to be called lady, woman, or pussy, all signifying a non-man or less than a man. But if a man isn't a man, what then is he? The answer most men seem to believe is nothing at all. There's nothing new about this situation for men. It has existed in Western societies for hundreds of years. What is new is that the traditional definition of masculinity has come under attack, and it has become very confusing for men. Men are still supposed to exhibit all the manly virtues, but now they should also be sensitive and emotionally expressive, attributes that used to be considered feminine. It shows how we transform male babies, who are expressive, into adult beings who are somewhat less than human, who are cut off from huge portions of themselves, the parts that have to do with caring, nurturing, and expressing, who must wear a suit of armor almost all day and night, and who in a very real sense are only pale reflections of who they might be. At least in the old days, they were heavily rewarded for succeeding at being who society wanted them to be. But why should men be this way? Why should they be more interested in feelings? Where did they learn to focus on relationships, to express emotion, to be interested in children? The answer is nowhere at all. Although I will say, he wrote this book in the 90s. It has changed a lot. I have seen this change a lot over the few decades, that men definitely have responded to women's, requests for more emotional openness, to be more involved with the children. And I think men have largely appreciated this. Well, at the same time, we also know that women have become more financially independent and more autonomous. So I think that's sure, but for sure, there is more expected of men because femininity is given by having the right genitals in almost all societies. Okay, you're born a girl, so you're feminine. But masculinity or manhood, you're not born with, it's conditional. The guys watching this are going to agree. I've heard this so many times, right? You have to earn it somehow. There has to be a rite of passage. Having the right genitals is necessary, but not sufficient. Girls will grow up to be women simply by getting older, but boys need something special to become men. That's why most societies have had special rituals, usually difficult and painful, sometimes life-threatening. So Western societies long ago got rid of these rituals, but in the process, something valuable was lost, and men were left in a perpetual state of anxiety. Now one's manhood is always on the line. One deviant act is all it takes for your manhood to be questioned. Because before, is that once you got through the rituals, you're a man who could never again be questioned. But now we don't have rituals, so it's constantly being questioned. What do you guys think about that? I found that very interesting. So a boy's most intimate relationship usually is the relationship with his mother. He's just a baby, he's a little boy, mom's usually taking care of him. That's his most intimate relationship. And often dad is working a lot, or maybe that relationship is not that nurturing or positive. So, and he's saying that there's a wound that runs by this lack of care. If you want to see grown men cry, give them a safe setting and get them talking about their fathers. So and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but he's worked with couples. I think he was a therapist. So what happens is if a man's only intimate relationship ever was with his mother, he's wrenched away from his first real intimate relationship. He does not get to experience one with his father, and he is taught a body of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that are not conducive to intimacy. So a boy will arrive in adulthood quite unprepared for the requirements of a mature relationship. The point is simple and frightening. The socialization of males provides very little that is of value in the formation and maintenance of intimate relationships. And so often, and I would say this doesn't apply so much to boys that were raised from the 90s on, but definitely for the older generation more commonly. So the result is that men regard femaleness as strange and inferior, and they don't take women seriously. So although a man may dearly love a woman, he finds women icky, weird, weak, and dependent, overly emotional, at the mercy of their hormones. And so that is seeing women as inferior, isn't it? And since he had to break away from his mother, he once again has the fear of coming under the domination of a woman, which feels childlike. When he was a non-man, he doesn't want to be pussy whipped or henpecked. And so the reason I'm reading this part is because this inability to take women seriously or to look down on them as less than can cause much friction in adult relationships and negatively affects sex itself, as we will see later. Part of being tough is not getting or needing the loving touch that all babies get. Parents stop touching their boys early on. It seems somehow feminine or treating him like a baby or a sissy. Girls, on the other hand, continue to be touched and hugged. So we end up with women who understand touch as a basic human need and like to touch and be touched as a way of reinforcing contact and demonstrating affection. Men, in contrast, lose sight of their need for touching, except as a part of roughhousing or sex. So that's where some men get into the habit of, when they want some emotional connection, which is natural and human, they will go right for sex because they're uncomfortable with expressing intimacy any other way, through non-sexual touch, through talking, through just being together. So sex is their only way that they can allow themselves to be intimate, to be sensual. Now, the other thing that boys learn is competition. Boys learn competition, whereas girls learn cooperation. Competition is antithetical to intimacy. In competition, the question is who's on top and who's in front. In intimacy, the question is how close are we, or do we want to be? Closeness is tied to openness, how much we can share of ourselves. But it's difficult to be open if you have a competitive mental set. For the fear for what can be revealed can be used to the other person's advantage. Because of the emphasis on strength and self-reliance, men have trouble admitting to unresolved personal problems. It's not that problems don't come up, but you handle them, you solve them, you master them without help and complaint. That's a large part of being tough and independent. That's why men don't want to ask for directions, right? I'm not going to ask for help. So, like so many of the other ideas that men learn, this one puts them in a bind. What is a man supposed to be when he's confused, when he's frightened, when he needs help? If he acknowledges his confusion or fear and asks for help, there's something wrong with him. He's not as tough as he ought to be. On a mundane level, this belief results in the ridiculous behavior of men driving around endlessly in their cars because to stop and ask for directions which suggest they need help, which they actually do. Not being able to talk about problems works against intimacy. And it also prevents men from getting what they need. If they can't talk about their problems or admit they need help, they're also slower to admit to illnesses and other physical problems, and they're even slower to admit to emotional distress. Being a male is like living in a suit of armor, ready for battle to prove himself. The armor may offer protection, but it's horribly confining and not much fun. In fact, fun is exactly what it's not. Maybe this is why so many men take to alcohol or other ways of deadening themselves. It may help explain men's fascination with sports. In sports, many of the usual prohibitions on males are lifted. A man can be as emotional and expressive about his favorite team and players as he wants. He can cheer them on with unabashed enthusiasm and what might even pass for love. He can be ecstatic and jump up and down when they win, and he can feel despair and weep when they lose. Playfulness and creativity are allowed. He can dress up in ridiculous hats and shirts, make up posters and poems and songs, and just be plain silly. There's even a lot of physical contact, back and butt slapping, touching of shoulders and arms and hugging, and cursing a bad call, a decision, or a mistake is a way of expressing anger without much risk. Sports is one of the few places where men can safely drop the facade of Mr. Uptight and in control and just play. Now, how do we learn about sex? When children enter puberty, they start behaving a little bit differently because testosterone in boys and estrogen in girls makes a crucial difference. They seek each other out, but they also propel along separate paths. Boys already have learned that sexual interest and prowess are crucial to being a man. The message permeates our culture. Here's how the hero of a romance novel thinks of himself. Quote, "He was, after all, a very physical man with a highly active sex drive. He enjoyed women, all kinds of women. After all, you can't be a hero if you don't have a whopping sex drive." We tend to admire males who get around, but although women are no longer expected to be virgins, God help any of them who has had sex with too many men, however many that might be. So since sexuality is such a crucial component of masculinity, males feel pressure to act interested in sex, whether or not they really are. They have to join in the jokes and banter. Getting any Fred? Oh yeah, more than I know what to do with. The sex that adolescent boys learn about is totally penis-centered. The focus is narrow-mindedly on what can be done with their frequent erections. But this penis orientation has to do with more than just immediate pleasure and release. Boys are aware, even if only vaguely, that having and using erections has something to do with masculinity. The sex that boys learn about is also largely impersonal. Although this message may serve one of nature's goals for men to spread their seed as widely as possible, regardless of love or commitment, and therefore be programmed into men, there's no shortage of cultural messages to reinforce the idea. For example, a man says, I'd love to fuck her. Not that I care for her that much. I just have a hunch she'd be fun between the sheets. The message is clear. For men, sex doesn't have to be connected to anything except lust. And it doesn't matter much toward whom it's directed. At this early age, we can see the start of the male split between love and sex. Because sex is centered on their desire for physical release and the need for them to prove themselves. And that's not what men want, it's what they're pressured into. That's what the point here is of this book. Girls go in a different direction, perhaps because their genitals are internal, less obvious, and less obtrusive than boys. Their attention isn't constantly drawn downward. Probably of greater importance is that nature had a different task in mind for women than for men, to find a mate to help care for and raise the children they produced. Teenage girls aren't as focused on physical sex as boys. Getting off in itself isn't nearly as important to them. Girls' sexuality is channeled or filtered through personal connection. They want to have sex with Prince Charming or Mr. Right in the context of a relationship. The idea of a group of girls getting together to have sex with Joe Dork just because he's willing to put out is almost unthinkable. More so than men's, women's first sexual experience with a partner is likely to be with someone they love. That the sex boys learn about is performance-oriented goes without saying. What else could it be for a person who has already had over a decade of training in becoming a performance machine? So this first chapter sets the groundwork in that men are raised from an early age to have to perform and to prove themselves constantly, and that they're often trained into seeing sex as something that they must always be willing to do and to conquer and to have a lot of, whether they feel like it or not. So this pressure on men. Now we're going to go into a more fun chapter. It's 2 feet long, hard as steel, and will knock your socks off. The fantasy model of sex. Myth number 1. We're liberated folks who are very comfortable with sex. So the sexual revolution and erotica and porn and cultural messaging give us the idea that everyone is comfortable with sex. doing it when they want, with whom they want, and how they want, in any way that they want. But the truth of it is that people have not yet reached sexual nirvana in our society. You know, women still worry about their weight, men still worry about their erections. We still do not have good sex education in schools. We still feel uncomfortable talking about sex with our partners, feel guilty about masturbating, and have trouble consistently and effectively using protection against disease and unwanted pregnancy. Sex is still relegated to a shadow existence, and silence is the rule. Sex is a private affair, something we don't talk about, not with friends, often not even with lovers or mates. Myth number 2, a real man isn't into sissy stuff like feelings and communicating. The absence of sex problems in the media, especially in men, is unfortunate because it plays into the larger fiction discussed in chapter 1, which we just talked about, that men don't have any personal problems of any kind. Men are supposed to have it all together all the time, so they're not willing to acknowledge difficulties and get help. So it makes it difficult for a man to discuss with a new partner that he's concerned about his desire, arousal, erections, or early ejaculations. The ability to talk about sex is also important because in many relationships there's less sex than the man wants, precisely because his partner feels the absence of connection. He doesn't listen to her or talk to her, so she feels estranged and isn't receptive when he comes on to her. Myth number 3, all touching is sexual or should lead to sex. Touching soothes us, makes us feel loved and supported, makes us feel good. The idea that touching is sexual is so deeply ingrained that many men don't consider having physical contact unless it is part of or going to lead to sex. Women complain about not getting as much touching as they want, but they aren't the only ones being deprived. Men need touching if only they knew it and treat themselves as well. There are many times when all we need is a hug or be held. It's ridiculous to go through a whole sexual act to get that. This myth that touching should lead to sex robs us of the joys of just touching, confuses us as to what we want, and puts pressure on us to be sexual whenever we touch or are touched. Myth number 4. A man is always interested and always ready for sex. The reality is that no one is always interested in any one activity. Of course, there are times when a man would rather read, or sleep, or walk, or talk, or be comforted than have sex. Too bad it's so hard to admit this. This myth also puts tremendous pressure on young men to be sexual as early as possible. Although some young men won't be ready to have sex with a partner until they're out of college. If you aren't ready to talk to someone about sex, and if you aren't ready to ask them for a back rub or a hug, you're definitely not ready to have good sex with them. So I also had this myth that men were always wanting to fuck. I myself had this myth So this is good for us women to learn to understand men. That's what this book is really about, is understanding the pressures on men and how unrealistic and actually cruel they are and inhumane what we expect of men and what men expect of themselves. I remember when after my divorce, I went through a sexual exploration phase, and I was hooking up with a lot of these really young guys, young Marines in their 20s, at the height of their sexual prime. And sometimes I'd be like, hey, you want to come over? And they'd be like, I'm tired. And I couldn't understand, how could you be too tired for sex? But now I get it. It was like 8:30 at night and they were tired. They didn't want to drive all the way over here and have sex and have to perform and then get up early the next morning. And sometimes they wanted to go out with their buddies. That's the other thing I learned about men. The one good thing about men who work in these male-centered, kind of feels like the military, is that they form bonds with other men, and their male friendships become very important, and they look forward to, you know, Friday night out with the guys, or football nights, or whatever. And sometimes they would rather be with their buddies than have sex. I was so disappointed at the time. Like, what is wrong with you? But I didn't understand. I didn't understand. This book is good for me also. Yeah, sometimes men want to be with their friends, or they want to garden, or they want to read. Maybe they just want to hug. They don't always want to have sex. Sex requires a lot of a man. He has to get hard. He has to worry about so many other things, as we'll get into in this book. You know, there's pressure, and he has to be, it takes energy, physical energy. So, myth number 5, a real man performs in sex. You've got to have good equipment, and you've got to use it right. Sex isn't mainly for enjoyment or to express love or caring or lust. It's mainly to prove that you're a man. This performance orientation explains why men are so much into measurements. If sex is to enjoy and express personal feelings, then you just do and enjoy. But if you're into proving something, then you have to know how you measure up. How big is it? How long did it last? How many orgasms were there? The performance orientation also explains why some men brag about sex to their friends. What's the point of a great performance if no one knows about it? So in this book, he quotes quite a few really funny things from romance novels. So this one I'm going to read. This one is from Erica Jong's bestseller, Parachutes and Kisses. He heaped the pillows in front of her for her to lean on, and cupping her breasts, he took her from behind. Oh my God. I do not want to lose my channel again. So I'm afraid I'm going to lose my channel again for reading this stuff, because that's just the kind of stuff I was reading from my book, The Fuck List, when I got a strike for that video. So I'm going to use code words. Instead of using the word C-U-N-T, I'm just going to say C. Okay, maybe I shouldn't even read it. He heaped the pillows in front. This is for educational purposes only. He heaped the pillows in front of her for her to lean on, and cupping her B, he took her from behind, ramming her harder than before. Her C, throbbed, ached, and tingled. She screamed for him to ram her even harder, to smack her, to pound her. She had never come before in this position, but when she did, it was as if 39 years of cums were released, and she howled and growled like an animal, whereupon he was AROUSED, beyond containment, and he began to CUM with a pelvis and a COCK gone wild, pounding her fiercely, filling her with you know what. Phew, I get tired just reading this stuff. See, it would have been so much more fun to read it, you guys, but you get what it was saying. Like, he was just, it was just this wild, magical, pounding thing, and everybody was lost in this moment. But one fascinating fact is that fictional accounts of sex almost invariably depict male performance and female pleasure. He acts. This is how he's performing. He rams, he pounds, he thrusts, and he bangs. And her pleasure, which she feels, unbearable pleasure, overwhelming joy, delirious ecstasy. Although she sometimes performs, because she too can thrust and bang, it's really clear what he feels and experiences. It's as if his feelings and pleasure are beside the point. Now we'll get to myth number 6. Sex is centered on a hard penis and what's done with it. The adolescent male's fixation on his penis remains constant throughout his life. When men think of sex, they think of what they can do with or what can be done to their erections. That's what it's all about. And not any old penis or erection will do. Men have a set of specifications for what's required. Size. Penises in Fantasyland come in only 3 sizes. Large, extra large, and so big you can't get them through the door. Massive, huge, and enormous are commonly mentioned in fiction. She reached inside his pants and freed his huge erection. He was so big that she could not reach her fingers all around him. And on and on and on. Also, second one is hardness. These organs might be mistaken for telephone poles. They're not mere flesh and blood, but hard as steel, hard as a rock, or a diamond cutter. One wonders whether we're talking about making war or making love with these tools. There is, of course, no joy in a penis that's sort of hard, semi-hard, or only 70% erect. Now the activity. These rock-like monstrosities manifest an excess of exuberance, for they are forever leaping, surging, springing, and in general, behaving in a manner that might be considered dangerous for objects so large and hard. 2 examples from novels. He sprang swollen into her hand. She captured his surging phallus. Sounds like one that almost got away. Nowhere does one read of a penis that quietly moseyed out for a look at what was going on before springing and crashing into action. The desired penis functions automatically and predictably, just like a well-oiled machine. It should immediately spring into full readiness whenever its owner decides he will use it. If you're dancing close with someone, your penis should be fully erect, pressing mightily against your pants and making its presence clearly felt. If a woman unzips your fly, your erection ought to spring out at her. Anyway, it goes on and on. Automatic functioning means that the penis should function regardless of any other considerations. Neither rain, nor snow, nor sleet shall keep the almighty penis from its appointed rounds. No matter if you're sick or well, tired or fresh, preoccupied or fully present, if you like your partner or not, if you're angry or not, if you're anxious or relaxed, or if you've gotten any stimulation or not, your penis should immediately come to full attention and do its manly thing. Penises in Fantasyland are also distinguished by their ability to last. They can literally go all night. In one scene, Admiring Wife in one novel, she goes, with Dax, it's like having a machine gun inside you. It never stops shooting, neither does he. Immediately after they both come, she looked at him in surprise. You're still hard, she exclaimed, a note of wonder coming into her voice. She threw her head back as he thrust himself into her again. The clear message to men and to women is that a man showing up at a sexual event without a rock-hard penis is as inappropriate as a carpenter showing up for work without his hammer and tape measure. You simply can't leave home without your stiff dick. Almost needless to say, these requirements make men feel inadequate about the size and power of their penises and under a bit of pressure to have and keep erections. Myth 7. If your penis isn't up to snuff, we have a pill that will take care of everything. It is true that Viagra does give many men an erection, but it does not fix most sexual problems because being erect is hardly all there is to good sex. Viagra does not make you a good lover or even make you want to have sex, and it does not heal relationship problems. Myth 8. Sex equals intercourse. Both men and women learn that the main thing in sex is intercourse. So a lot of people will call sex, when they say sex, they mean intercourse, which is completely wrong, you guys. Anything that is, to me, anything that's touch-related arousing is sex, whether it's oral, manual, any kind of stimulation, laying on top of each other, grinding on each other, that's all sex. People act as if those things are irrelevant to the main act of intercourse. That is so bad thinking and leads to so many problems because it negates everything else that people enjoy to some kind of an inferior position. Like mutual masturbation is totally hot, and people don't really want to do that or talk about that very much. It also puts a lot of pressure on the man to have to be hard. Since the goal of the vast majority of sexual encounters is not conception, there is no good reason why they have to include or end in intercourse, unless that is what participants desire. Insisting on intercourse creates a number of problems. It reinforces our performance orientation, makes it difficult to enjoy other aspects of what's going on because we're so focused on getting to the intercourse. And it reinforces our anxiety about erections, and that results in more erection problems. So here he gives a really good example of, say that, because some men, if their penis doesn't get hard, they don't want to have sex at all. So he has the analogy of a man who has a Mercedes. Okay, so his penis is hard and everything. He has a Mercedes. He gets a lot of pressure from it, and then his luck changes and he has to sell the car. What will we think if he refused to drive any other car or take public transportation, saying, if I can't go the right way, I won't go at all? Wouldn't we consider him silly? What if he finally came to terms with taking buses or driving another car, but his wife refused to go with him because she considers a bus or Toyota settling for second best? Wouldn't we see her as a bit rigid in her thinking? Yet when it comes to sex, people behave in these peculiar ways all the time. Some men who have trouble with erections stop having sex altogether. Still others will do other things but feel terrible because they didn't have an erection. There's nothing wrong with wanting a Mercedes and erections and intercourse, but there's also a lot to be said for flexibility. In fact, it's one of the hallmarks of maturity. Myth 9. A man should make the earth move for his partner, or at the very least knock her socks off. In Fantasyland, sex is always the best, the greatest, the most powerful. The earth always moves. There's also concern about the type of orgasm women have. In Fantasyland, they're quick and furious. Women have orgasms instantaneously, or almost before he was fully inside her, always accompanied by screams and a thrashing of limbs. With 3 violent thrusts, he brought her to orgasm, is one example. The quitting of sex with orgasm has become so common that many men might react with incredulity to my calling it a myth, asking, what's the point of sex without a climax? Well, what's the point indeed? What's the point of dinner without dessert? Or a football game without a touchdown? The point is simple. With or without an orgasm, with or without dessert, with or without a touchdown, the sex, dinner, and game go on. There's interesting stuff to be had. If only you can pay attention and not get upset because it doesn't have the ending you want. Again, maturity. What's the point of twisting oneself into a pretzel in order to have an orgasm? Many men try to force their own orgasms by thrusting wildly and calling up every fantasy they can think of. And some men even fake their orgasms because they have no idea how to stop the activity without an orgasm. Just stop. Just say, I'm done. You guys know I was an escort for many years, and sometimes men do struggle to come. It's a real thing. Okay, they have performance anxiety. They can't get hard. Just as soon as they see the condom, their penis goes down. It's all in their head, or they can't come, or they want to come a second time and they can't. And it's okay to say, you know what, I'm done. And they would feel comfortable with me saying that. But can you say that in a relationship and have your woman think she doesn't turn you on enough? It's not about that. It's not about that. I could be with the hottest guy ever and not have an orgasm because I'm intimidated by his hotness. Okay, sometimes it's easier to have an orgasm with a guy who isn't hot because I'm more relaxed. I don't feel the pressure. Okay? We're humans. But anyway, men also put pressure on their partners to have quick, loud orgasms so that they, the men, will be able to feel good about themselves. No wonder that faking orgasms on the part of women hasn't gone out of style. Even if she has a real one, she may feel pressure to fake several more or to make it more dramatic than it really is. What's the point of doing this to one's partner? There's a point, come to think of it, understandable but still harmful. We men are obsessed with specifications and indicators. Now that women are supposed to enjoy sex, which men take to mean that we are supposed to make it enjoyable for them, how do we know they enjoyed it? We need a clear sign, and orgasm is the clearest sign we can think of. Yet all of this is foolishness. There can be good sex that doesn't include orgasm for either partner, that has orgasm for only one partner, that has only one orgasm for the woman, that involves less than house shaking and bed breaking orgasms. In our last myth, myth number 10, good sex is spontaneous, with no planning and no talking. So, Fantasyland sex is spontaneous. People get turned on to each other and one thing leads to another, as we like to say. Of course, one or both partners may have been thinking about sex beforehand, hoping for it, anticipating it, and they may hint, flirt, tease, and seduce. But apparently, it's not okay to talk openly and plan together for sex. Here's a quote from best-selling author Jackie Collins. A man and woman who don't know each other and who have barely exchanged a dozen words start having sex. There was nothing awkward about their lovemaking. He entered her smoothly and she moved with him as if they had been together many times before. Instinctively, she knew his rhythm and he knew hers. Isn't that nice? Nothing was awkward, and each instinctively knew the other's rhythm and presumably desires as well. Just like in real life, right? Later, as the man recalls the experience, he thinks this: no corny lines or bullshit, just wonderfully uninhibited silent sex. The message is clear. Discussing sex or even getting to know one another, all this is corny lines or bullshit. Only silent sex is real and meaningful. I love that. Only silent sex is real and or meaningful. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to plan it. Because if we have to talk about or plan it, it's not real. It's not meaningful. That's like showing up to the airport with your suitcases in hand and saying, hey, you got any planes going to any interesting places today? Fantasy sex is so popular because it feeds into the childish fantasy we all carry around, where people instinctively know what the other wants and willingly provide it, where there are no serious problems, where we can have whatever we want and all we want of it. Childish fantasy. It's childish to not talk about sex. It's childish to not plan sex. It's immature, in my opinion. We have no trouble planning dates, social events, trips, vacations, parties. We have no trouble planning to drive to work, to go to the gym. We have no trouble planning things that are important, that are meaningful. To plan a party for a beloved, to go somewhere, to go to the dentist, to schedule a massage, to go to the gym. We have no trouble planning that. And few people have any problems discussing what to do about dinner tonight. Do you want to eat in or go out? Early or late? Chinese, Mexican, Italian, or what? No problem with any of that. But because we still view sex, even in marriage, as not quite all right, we'd rather sneak our way into it and call it spontaneity. Planning sex usually involves talking about it, something that makes most of us very uncomfortable. So the less we plan and the less we talk about it, the less real it seems, and the less embarrassed we have to get. We pay heavily for our desire for spontaneity. Because of a lack of planning, we often have less sex than we want. Our spontaneous invitations often get rebuffed because of insufficient time or energy. Because we don't want to plan and talk, we often fail to use necessary protections against disease and conception. Yet another price is that sex often isn't as good as it could be if we were willing to plan for it by making time, anticipating it, setting the appropriate mood, and so on. Because if you like sex, wouldn't you want to plan for it and look forward to it? I do. I have some that I'm looking forward to today. That may not happen today. I have some sexual encounters that I have scheduled that I'm really excited about and looking forward to. And when I was married towards the end, we did plan our sex dates, and I would look forward to them all week. So another question would be, maybe some people don't want to plan it because they don't like the sex they're having. And again, that has to do with being willing to talk about it and figure out what you like and don't like and why you don't want to plan it, why you may not look forward to it, you know? Not planning it, not wanting to plan it is a good question to ask, like, why don't I want to plan it? If you want more sex, safer sex, and better sex, you might want to rethink whether spontaneity is really crucial. And while you're thinking, keep in mind that planning does not rule out spontaneity. Couples who have good sex talk about it and plan for it and also take advantage of spontaneous opportunities. Okay, so that was just the first 34 pages. I've only gone through this. There's so much more. So I'm not committing to going through more of this book, but I might. I just think it's like really, really good. But it takes a lot of time to go through the book, so I'm not sure yet. Anyway, I'll be back for the comments. I'm really curious what you think about, you know, the performance pressure on men and the myths about male sexuality and how this has impacted your sex life, whether you're a man or a woman. And thank you for watching my video.